Okay, mislim дека е време да почнеме. Hello everyone and welcome to the third public engagement online event that follows our project, The Touch, a part of the Big Future Ecologies project, which was organized in partnership with British Council and Lux, which was opened on 15th of September, and it's still on in the National Gallery of North Macedonia in Mala Stanica until 15th of October. So today we are going to have two of the artists that are being a part of this exhibition. So let me welcome Christina Pulikova and Nigel Henderson, who are with us tonight. So we are going to share their experiences, their works that are actually being included in this exhibition, but as well we're going to talk about some other works of theirs that are occupied with topics which are in some way related with ecology, different kinds or levels of reading future ecologies about colonization, decolonization, human empowerment, protection of the environment, diseases, migration, and etc., etc. So before we start the direct talk with the artist, let me just shortly introduce them. So Christina Pulikova is a Macedonian artist based between Skopje, North Macedonia, and London, UK. Her interdisciplinary practice is informed by science and technology. Christina's work explores how the use of technology might lead to greater forms of sustainability in human-nature relationships. Working across moving image, sound, and installation, she aims to build subjective narratives based on scientific data and principles. In her work, she tends to imagine voices from creatures, objects, and even atoms in order to inhabit non-human perspectives. Through use of immersive technology, Christina's work often deal with environmental issues, telling personal stories that place audiences at the center of the scene, allowing for a protagonist perspective and a different way of seeing. And let me tell you just a short bio of the other artists of Nigel Henderson. He is a filmmaker and writer who experiments with different ways of working with people to address and question our current global condition defined by radical capitalism and ever-present histories of the European colonial project. Since 2017, Henderson has been working within the artist group, The Living and the Dead Ensemble. Based between Haiti and France, they focus on theater, song, slam, poetry, and cinema. Their first feature film, Overtures, was awarded a Fipreschi Special Mention at the 70th Berlin International Film Festival 2020. His work has been shown in various international film festivals, art museums, and biennials, and is distributed by Lux and Vida Data Bank. He lives and works in Paris. And now I'm going to invite first Christina to tell us a bit more about her present work at the exhibition The Touch, Future Ecologies, which is entitled Where We All Meet, and to present it to the audience, to those that didn't have chance to see the exhibition, and maybe invite them in some way to come and use the last 1 week until the end of this exhibition to see it, and as well a bit explain the concept behind, and let's start the talk. So Christina, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for the lovely introduction as well. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see all the things that I will be presenting. Just a sec. Yes, it's sharing the sound. Right. So could you just confirm that you can see the screen with the presentation on? Yes, thank you. Thanks. I'm seeing thumbs up. Perfect. So I'm going to start with a very short presentation about Where We All Meet, which is the project that I am showing at Mala Stanica part of the National Gallery in Skopje, North Macedonia. As Anna very kindly introduced me and said, a bit about my practice, I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to dive straight into the project. So Where We All Meet is a work that deals with the migration and life cycle of the critically endangered European eel. Eels are an animal that is not usually associated with I guess, with biodiversity or associated with, I guess, endangered animal species, because I guess the first thing that comes to mind is a panda or a polar bear, or, and these animals are, like, these fish are not, I guess, in my opinion, they're not given enough attention. And the reason why I started looking at the European eels and their migration is because so 7 years ago, I found out that the eels that live in the Ohrid Lake in North Macedonia are basically not able to migrate back to their place in the to their birthplace in the Sargasso, which is at the same time the beginning and the end of their life cycle. And they actually cannot come back to the Sargasso Sea because there are 6 dams that separate the eels from the Ohrid Lake and the Sargasso Sea, making their journey back absolutely impossible. So I have been talking to a lot of scientists. I have been talking to scientists from the Hydrobiological Institute in Ohrid in North Macedonia about this horrendous, this horrendous experience of the eels. As well as I have been in touch with scientists from the Zoological Society in London to talk about the experience of the eels in the River Thames, and to kind of try and flesh out what these experiences are and how I can, the idea was to trace to the lives of 2 eels, one coming from the Ohrid Lake and one coming from the River Thames, and how they basically, they somehow magically get in touch and start communicating and telling each other the stories of how they came from the Sargasso to Europe, the shores of Europe, and then how, what their fantasies are of going back to that place, which is that birthplace in the Sargasso Sea. And the Sargasso Sea actually, it's located in the Bermuda Triangle, so it's a sea that has no borders, has no land. It's basically, I guess it's just bounded by 4 currents. So it just sits between currents. It's in the North Atlantic Ocean, and it's the thing about the eels and where they come from is the thing that is also mind-blowing is that actually no one knows where exactly in the Sargasso Sea the eels are spawning. So no one actually knows where this magical secret place is, nor what the eel's act of love looks like. So, all these things basically blew my mind. I started digging more and more into the lives of eels, and came up with this, I guess, 2-part installation that takes the journey of the eels, brings these 2 eels into conversation, in a dialogue with each other, and then this dialogue is followed by the second piece, which is a virtual reality 360 video, where I'm basically imagining what the eel's act of love looks like. And for this, I'm using dancers, I'm using swimmers, I've used underwater footage to basically create this idea of the eels basically having this having this experience, this act of love, and basically questioning what we can do as humans, what we can do as citizens to basically raise awareness of the fact that this species demands our attention, and to just see whether the eels from the Ohrid Lake could somehow be freed and to be enabled to take their journey back to the Sargasso and basically continue their gene pools in a way. So what I want to do is to show you a short documentation because this project has had many forms. And the image that you were seeing now was actually a project that I did with water projections onto the Ohrid Lake itself, followed by a 360 VR presentation of the second film. So this is a 3-minute long video, and I'm going to play it so that you can see the documentation. Right. So let me just get out of this bit. So that's the presentation of the project happening in Ohrid. And what's quite nice about this whole journey of where we all meet is that actually Anna's been there throughout each stage of the project. So she was curating this project in Ohrid as well, which was, you know, the site-specific installation. And the beautiful thing was that I was able to you know, take the eels to the Ohrid Lake. So, you know, it was so nice to see, you know, the story of the eels happening right over, you know, over their, well, their house. And the thing is that I actually did involve the scientists from the Hydrobiological Institute as well here, because the Ohrid Lake is a protected area. And we did an environmental survey, making sure that the eels, that it is safe, in fact, to create this installation, this water screen installation for the biodiversity, the flora and the fauna of the lake. So yeah, just to say for everyone out there listening, no animals have been harmed through through this installation. So following that piece at Ohrid, following that staging, where we'll move to Greenland Festival in Wales. So it was shown there at their mountain stage, which is the main stage on the big screens at night. So right after the the performances ended, then the Where We'll Meet would take over, and people were able to see the work there as well. And finally, the work made its way to Mala Stanica, which is currently on show. And it's the third and final staging of the work, which includes the entire presentation of in the same way that it was shown at Ohrid, so with the water projections. And there is also a chance for people to experience the VR work as well within the gallery. So yes, if you're able to go, please do, because yeah, it's an amazing show with such interesting artists and such a good topic and such a relevant topic for our times. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this project. Thanks. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Thanks, Christina, for this wonderful presentation. I just want to mention or ask you a question at this point about the other levels of reading where we all meet. It's not just related with the story of eel and the sad story of our local eel that cannot make its own reproductional system in natural way. But there are other levels of reading this, and it talks generally about migration of humans as well. And actually, in some ways, an intimate story of your own in some way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, you're right. I do think that I focused on, on the animal subject a lot because I guess, yeah, because I guess it's something that is too close to home in a way. But yes, you're absolutely right. You know, when you and I talked about what this project means, what it represents, it is also in a way a split of it's almost autobiographical, because for me as a migrant, you can really tell how difficult it is to cross borders, and just kind of being split between living in Skopje and London. It's again, it's something that I do wanted, I wanted to draw parallels between the human lived experience and that of the eels, because I think it is important to draw these parallels, because I guess the more we kind of, it's not about anthropomorphizing, but it's also, but in a way, the more people think about animals and other beings as on the same base as humans, they just in a way might feel more empathy. And this is my opinion. It's not it's nothing set in stone, but it is like an outgoing point for me as well. So I am always trying to kind of draw parallels between the human experience and the animal experience, so that there can be some other levels of empathy and yeah, like different ways of experiencing their lived their lives and so on.
Thank you, Christina. So until we talk with you again later on, now I invite Louis Henderson to present his moving image work that is now presented at the Touch in Mala Stanica. It's entitled Old That Is Solid. So in a way, here in your work, you're as well talking about human empowering over other not species here, but over, let's say, more weaker or more undeveloped societies. So can you please tell us a bit more about your work of art, explain it through some images and through your own words?
Sure thing. I'll just share my screen as well. Okay. So this is actually a talk. It's called Talk on Rubbish. It's quite a good title. Or actually, I was also going to call it Rubbish Talk. Basically, I mean, this is the film All That Is Solid is a film that was actually something, it's a video that I made in 2014, and it's actually a recycled version of a previously made film called Lettres du Voyant, which was a film I made in Ghana in 2013. And the reason why I say it's a recycled film is because the film itself deals with recycling, especially the first film in 2013 called Visionary Letters, Lettres du Voyant. This was partly filmed in an electronic waste ground, it's a sort of rubbish dump basically called Agblogboshi, which is in Accra, the capital of Ghana in West Africa. And in that place is where lots of computer waste, e-waste, electronic waste sent from, I would say, the overdeveloped world is sent there to Ghana to be recycled. And in more often than not, it actually just arrives on the back of a shipping container and is dumped in that place. I can actually just quickly show you an image of it. I mean, they're quite famous photographs, which other people have also shown before. There's even been a film that was made there called Sodom and Gomorrah that was made relatively recently. And basically the computers, often the young boys predominantly, who are there on the rubbish site, they take the old computers, old PCs, for example, and they burn the plastic casing off the computers. And they do this so that they can access easier the precious metals that are contained within a computer. So I was interested in going there and looking at this process, basically this process of extraction of precious metals from the inside of a computer. And so I just actually wanted to give a bit of background about what my interest in rubbish, or where my interest in rubbish or waste grounds comes from. And you know, in my life, there's like various different ghosts that have that continue to haunt my life as an artist, especially, and as a young adult, and then now later in my almost middle age. I'm still haunted by these figures. One of them is my great uncle, Nigel Henderson. You're seeing an image of him right now on the screen. That's self-portrait photograph, or a distorted photograph that he made. I'm not quite sure of the year. I think that must have been made in the 1980s. And this is a photograph of his that he took in East London in the 1950s. He lived in an area of London called Bethnal Green, and which was very badly damaged during the Second World War. And he used to go around the bomb sites. This is a place, this photograph is a picture of a house that's been bombed during the Second World War. And he would take photographs of what was left over after the bombing. He would also go to rubbish sites there, like huge waste grounds where there had been a bombing and the building had been destroyed. And he would spend days or hours and hours each day going through these rubbish dumps in the bombed out East End of London. And he would collect scraps of rubbish, scraps of waste, such as you see here in this image. These are pieces of metal, of wire, some kind of cog contraption here. These are bits of wire, these are springs. These look like springs as well. And he would take them home to his studio, or I think at the time he was studying at the Slade Art School in London. So maybe he would take them to the photography studios at the Slade, and he would place these pieces of metal onto light sensitive paper. And he would make these images, which are called photograms, or as he called them at the time, hendergrams. So he was interested in quite literally taking rubbish and turning it into artistic images. This is another one you can see. He's taken a milk bottle that he found on a smashed up milk bottle he found on a bomb site in East London, and he's made an image from that. So one of the other ghosts in my life, or two very important ghosts, this man here on the left, that's my grandfather, Peter Shinney. And this is my grandmother, Margaret Shinney. They're both dead now, the same as my great uncle. And they were archaeologists. You see here, this is the archaeology department, the Volta Basin Research Project, University of Ghana in Legon. So my grandfather and grandmother moved, they lived in Sudan originally, and then after the Sudanization, after the revolution in '52 and the Sudanization of their jobs, my grandfather lost his job. He was running the Museum of Antiquities in Khartoum, and he lost his job, and he ended up moving to Ghana, and he set up this this department of archaeology in the University of Legon. This is an earlier picture from when they were both working together, both my grandfather and grandmother in Sudan. That's my grandmother there, looking rather badass with her sunglasses on. And you can see here fragments of pots and different things that they dug up from the ground. Essentially, in my opinion, again, they were both interested in digging up waste, in digging through piles of leftover materials to try and piece them together to make new narratives. So one of the things that interested me so much about this method, you know, both from my great uncle, Nigel Henderson, of looking through waste and trying to turn it into poetic images that could have, you know, other meanings. And then the work of my grandparents as archaeologists of looking through waste and rubbish to try and think about the history of certain places on the African continent, because my grandfather and grandmother, they worked predominantly, I mean, entirely on the African continent. And they were working in the 50s and the 60s. And I mentioned, you know, that my grandfather lost his job because of the Egyptian revolution in 1952. And then he was invited to Ghana, actually, in 1957 after the Ghanaian revolution, in which Kwame Nkrumah became the first president of, you know, Ghana previously was called the Gold Coast. It was a British colony. And in '57, it became independent, and with Kwame Nkrumah as the first president of that, and it was the first independent sub-Saharan African country. So my grandparents were sort of there in Africa at that moment where the continent was going through processes of decolonization, but they were still interested in history and archaeology. Both of them were left-wing politically, members of the Communist Party, and they were anti-colonial. They were anti-colonial, and they were trying to figure out how to do kind of archaeology as an anti-colonial practice. And this is a book that my grandmother wrote in the '60s called Ancient African Kingdoms, in which this is her, you know, most important treatise in some respects of precisely how archaeology and history could be used as a means to gather information and knowledge, and to spread that information and knowledge and education about the importance and the history of the African continent before it was colonized by European colonial powers. And this is written at a time of the kind of the beginnings of African independence from European colonialism. So that's a picture of my grandfather's grave, and this is my grandfather's second wife here in the green shirt. That's Amashini, and that's her sisters and her brother. And so years later, then I pick up this interest in waste, as I said, and archaeology, and I try to apply it to film practice. So how can I think of a film practice that itself is interested in leftovers, in the refuse of society, in the waste, in the pieces of material that have been discarded? But how could that be connected to an interest and an understanding of, in this instance with this film, a sort of attempt at a kind of decolonization, but within a neo-colonial sphere? What I was interested here is that, so Ghana was called the Gold Coast. It was a country that was mined for gold by the British, but actually today it's still being mined for gold by people from China, from Canada, setting up gold mines, still extracting that metal from the earth. But also in places like Agbogboshe, here you have the Ghanaian who's actually going through processes of extracting precious metals, copper, silver, gold, from the waste of Europe. this computer has probably, you know, been sent to Ghana from Europe or from North America, from countries in the overdeveloped world, and sent there as waste, and the Ghanaian is extracting from this European waste or this North American waste precious metals to actually make a living. So what I saw at Agblogboshi was a kind of reversal of the colonial project of the extraction of minerals. In this instance, rather than the European extracting minerals from the land, from the African continent, we had a Ghanaian person extracting precious metals from the waste of Europe. And then the film form that I chose to do to express this content basically was through recycling old images from a film that I had previously shot the year before. The reason for that was, on the one hand, to try and develop a form that might have that might encapsulate quite clearly the actual content that I was speaking about. So how the film itself structurally could kind of lend itself to what it was speaking about even. But also quite simply because I found myself in a very difficult economic situation at that time in 2014. I didn't have any money or a job, and I was living in Paris off a very small grant to finish a postgraduate diploma. And I had just enough money to pay my rent and not enough money to make, to go shoot a new film. So, and I had a commission that was done for an exhibition in Montrouge in Paris. And I decided the best way that I could go about producing a new video at that time was by recycling my old images and also using the internet as a resource for new images, for images that I could work with almost in a kind of sort of collagistic sense. I'm just gonna show a clip, but I need to come back into the webinar to add the sound. Sorry. Oh yeah, no, it is there. It is there. I'm just going to show a very quick clip from that film, All That Is Solid.
Where is the Microsoft Cloud? In reality, it exists in our vast worldwide network of data centers that provide the foundation for a wide array of online services. Okay. Yeah, I'll finish there. I'll just wrap up with one brief comment. I mean, basically, so this was made like 8 years ago, actually, now, this film. And one of the key things that the both films, Lettres du Voyant from 2013 and All That Is Solid from 2014, try to approach is this sort of myth of the cloud that was being developed, you know, at the time, in, you know, in some respects as a way to, you know, dematerialize all of the data that we have as if to say, you know, you don't need hard drives, you don't need wires and plugs and metal, you don't need all this waste, because you can keep your data online in the cloud, and we will sort it out for you, and it will be a sort of wasteless solution. But of course, you know, that data that's held in the cloud is supported by huge data centers that have to, you know, use a lot of energy to actually keep running and to keep cool, for example. And so that was one thing. And then on the other side was this thing about how with this sort of obsession with technological advancement in the West, in the overdeveloped countries, or the global North, the West, however we want to try and name it, that there's a very heavy reality, a very toxic and difficult reality on the other side of that capitalist obsession with the advancement and the constant changing and development of new technological devices, which is this huge amount of waste that gets produced when those computers are suddenly, you know, deemed as being not worth anything anymore, and they get sent to somewhere like Agblogboshi in Accra, and they are burnt, and which is actually a very dangerous and toxic way of trying to make a living for these young Ghanaians. And that's what the film was really trying to address. Thank you.
Thanks, Louis, for this wonderful presentation, which actually gave us a pretty good idea about the development or chronology of your concept, and which is a part of the story that me neither didn't know about. And thanks for this beautiful introduction into the topic of your work and into the concept of your work, and into the, of course, into your personal story and relation with such topics, probably. So we'll get to you back in a few minutes. Now we go to Christina once again. My second round of questions to both of the artists would be to present their other works, or one work that actually they want to represent to the audience that is directly related with the general topic or any of the topics about future ecologists. So Christina, please tell us a bit more about your other projects, because ecological issues are very often a part of your artistic thinking, conceptualizing, and so on. So tell us a bit more.
Great, thanks, Anna. And yeah, I will be talking about, like you said, most of my work deal with the environment, and very often I use data and as well as kind of, yeah, ecological. Well, it has ecological themes. And yes, like I said before, it does deal with the non-human perspectives of ecology as well. So just going to share my screen. I'm going to be talking about two projects because I'm aware of time. It's quite short. So I first thought to had an idea to speak about three, but I'm going to talk about two things. And the first project. So I'm just going to be sharing my websites. Can you just tell me that you can see the screen? Am I presenting the right screen? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about this project called Atom C, and it's part of a bigger exhibition that's called Carbon Memories, and it deals with the carbon cycle. And in this work, so what I'm going to do is just, I'm going to play the piece, but I'm going to switch the sound off. So I might just, jump through bits and bobs, because it is a durational piece, and probably not going to, we can't go through the whole of it. But the idea is that I was looking at the carbon cycle, which is this thing that happens with the carbon atoms on Earth, and it's basically how carbon atoms, they transform from one thing to the other, and it's really like a very big global cycle that kind of keeps recycling the atoms And the idea is that, I took this first person view of a single carbon atom, and I kind of started it from the very beginning of the universe, and basically kind of wanted to take the atom through this journey, through the carbon cycle, which kind of starts with, the universe, and then we kind of continue to the atmosphere. So this is, I was also using some data sets from, prices of carbon and global sea level rises. And I was also using, I was also sonifying some of the data and using the sound for a different project, which kind of used also interactive ways of kind of accessing this data. And it's also inspired by Primo Levi's carbon chapter in his book called The Periodic Table of Elements. And Primo Levi is this amazing writer / chemist. He's also a Holocaust survivor, Italian writer. And he wrote this brilliant book called The Periodic Table, which is partly his autobiographical kind of story, but also it's kind of infused with different stories about different periodic elements, so different elements on the periodic table. And it kind of finishes with this chapter on carbon, and he tells the story of the journey of the carbon atom. So the work is very much inspired by this chapter that he wrote. And I was kind of thinking, I gave myself this fictional question of, if a carbon atom kind of lives through all these cycles, and it kind of, because elements live on, they don't it's very hard to destroy an element unless it's a part of some, I don't know, some massive explosion or fusion, or a lot needs to happen for an element to break down. So I kind of gave myself this question of, this carbon atom goes through millions and billions of cycles, and it goes through all these different forms. So it starts with the universe, goes into the atmosphere, goes into a plant, so it becomes part of the chlorophyll. So it just becomes part of the oxygen, and through this kind of cycle, it enters a human being, and basically just ends up in. It just ends up in, becomes part of our consciousness, because for us as humans, we're also, a very large part of us is carbon, and so carbon is the building block of life. So I was kind of looking at these, this different, tensions between what carbon is for us, because obviously we know carbon as CO2. So we know carbon as something that destroys the ecology, destroys nature, but we also know it as the building block of life. So there is this very big tension of it's a very loaded element, and we talk a lot about it because it's also a source of energy and so on. The question was, would the carbon atom remember all its previous beings or all its previous kind of forms? And if it had that in mind, so if an atom could remember, what would it think about where we are today in the history of the Earth, and what it means for our atmosphere, what it means for for the environment, and it was kind of, I wanted to put an accent on the human experience again, and the human impact on on what we're doing with the imbalance of the carbon atom in our atmosphere. So again, I was trying to kind of give essence or humanize this atom as much as I could. So therefore I kind of chose this first person perspective, and we're kind of traveling through through all of these different states and forms, but at the same time we're kind of we are the atom, we are this little piece that kind of merges and walks around and has all these different experiences. And after the human consciousness, then like after having being part of a protein, of a body, then this human, it could be expelled through, if you breathe out, it would be expelled, or if this human or being dies, then it just goes back into the ground and it's recycled and reshuffled again, and just it's a part of this very, very big very big system. So I was very into kind of showing that system and kind of I guess I did want to make this like this very, very big process that happens on Earth. I just wanted to dissect it as much as possible and to kind of ask these questions about where we are at the moment, and how and what our relationship to carbon is in general. And right, so that was that project. And also I was thinking, I was watching your piece, Louis, and I kind of thought that maybe this is a good project to share as well. And it's about it's called Red, and it's actually about a reverse colonization almost. It's about terraforming and how how terraforming becomes this like colonialist fantasy. And I was looking a lot at like all these kind of big tech guys from like multi-billionaires trying to colonize Mars and thinking about the next planet, whilst at the same time just completely ignoring the things that happen on Earth. And this thing that if we fuck it up here, we're just going to move on. It was such it's such a bizarre thing, and this whole film is kind of looking at this theory, the scientific theory of panspermia, which is this theory of that life basically came to Earth from space. So the first ever kind of life beings or the first cells, they may have come to us from Mars, kind of jumping from these like little bits of life were kind of traveling on asteroids or meteorites. And there are these theories that actually meteorites came to Earth, perhaps the ones that were carrying ice and things like that, and then they kind of like bombarded Earth with this with this life or this like life starting things, and this concept is quite interesting because we kind of like as human beings we're trying to kind of migrate life outside and like take it to a different place, and we kind of dream of making other places, hostile places, habitable, whilst at the same time like I said ignoring what's happening on Earth. So I was kind of thinking about that whole thing. Again, I was kind of like walking through this, like this is a 3D model of London. So it's like walking through a dilapidated London. That's the Waterloo Bridge over there, Somerset House, that's the wheel. So I was kind of thinking, well, are we really trying to terraform, or are we just like anti-terraforming here on Earth? So that was the whole idea. And it's something that I'm still kind of thinking a lot about, and it's I guess like there's no answer to this, but I just wanted to it's just so ridiculous how how this idea of colonizing kind of it still permeates, it's still present in people's minds, and but now it kind of like it only expanded, so we only became even more megalomaniacs with colonization. So I mean I don't know, I'd like to discuss this maybe, Louis, afterwards, but would love to hear what you think about that. That's it. Let me just stop sharing.
Thanks, Christina, for this interesting second answer to the question about other projects that do touch different aspects of future ecologies. So in sake of the time, let's now move on to Louis' answer to the second question, or discussion about at least one work that talks about these future ecologies.
Yeah, okay, I'm sharing my screen again, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's very interesting because, well, actually the project I'm going to speak, I'll just talk very briefly because it would be nice to leave a little bit of time to have some, if there's any questions from the public as well. But this project I'm going to talk about is actually sort of, it's funny because it's coming on from both of the projects, actually, from all three projects, I mean, that we've now been kind of speaking about, in that this is about a lake that has been flooding in the Dominican Republic, apparently because of climate change, apparently because of various different things. Some people say because, you know, it's actually, it's a salt water lake. It's a lake called Lago Enriquillo, which is in the Dominican Republic, which is one side of the island once called Hispaniola. On the other side is Haiti. It's a country that I've visited many years ago. It's also the place I went to when I first ever went to Haiti. I've been working in Haiti for the last 5 years. As you said in my bio, I work with a collective based between Haiti and France. Also, so the reason why this is quite interesting, just coming off on that idea about, you know, the current state of colonization and thinking about the colonization of Mars, for example. In many respects, the Dominican Republic is where like a lot of this kind of began in some respects. It's the country, it's the piece of land that was first colonized by the Spaniards in 1492. This is the first place where Christopher Columbus actually arrived, when he, you know, was discovered as such by the indigenous of the Americas, or anyway, in Europe, as we tell it, when Columbus apparently discovered the Americas. And the film that I made, you know, I went there in 2016 to look at the lake because I had heard from people. I was in the Dominican Republic on a residency for 3 months, and I had heard from people about this lake and that it was flooding, hyper-salinated lake that actually was created because there was, you know, many thousands of years ago, there was quite a significant shift, and the mountain range actually split in two and left behind this kind of channel of seawater that would split through the island. Then, as there's further tectonic shifts and mountains actually rise and get higher, they sort of enclosed this patch of water in a landscape and created a lake. It's actually below sea level, and it's hypersalinated because it's essentially made from very old seawater that has been, you know, kept trapped there in this valley, basically. The reason why I mentioned this about once it was the sea, it was once the ocean, is that when I was there in 2016, I met a paleontologist who was studying the lake and its surroundings, because what he was looking for was what you see in this image here. This is a piece of fossilized coral. So it's a lake, it's like I said, a hypersalinated lake that was once part of the ocean. So all along the banks of this river are masses and masses of fossilized corals. So corals that had died many years ago and have basically turned into stone, turned into rocks. And now, paleontologist was there because he was trying to discover or trying to find ways to stop the destruction of the coral reef system in the Caribbean. The way that he would do this was by looking at how coral had previously been living many centuries ago, and trying to look at how the corals had adapted and developed and changed according to the different rises in sea temperature.
And the way that he felt he could do this as a paleontologist was by studying the fossilized remains of, you know, once very thriving and living communities of coral. What he actually told us at the time was that what he discovered was that the coral that was growing around that area of Lago Enriquillo in the Dominican Republic, it was corals that would live in what he called the sort of multi-species assemblages. There was this, like, you know, he showed us one piece of coral that was actually made up of 4 different species of coral on one very small piece. So what he was interested in trying to think about was how potentially the future for saving the life of coral was like by looking back to previous ways that coral had lived in this very intense proximity with multiple species of different types of coral supporting each other through this kind of symbiotic structures. And why he was interested particularly in that was that the way that people were currently, in 2016 at least, trying to save coral from becoming extinct in this area of the Caribbean was by growing coral plantations, like planting coral under the sea, on the seabed, and trying to allow it to flourish and grow new communities of coral and fish, new ecosystems. But the problem that he found was that these plantations of coral were actually monocultural, in the sense that they were only trying to grow one species of coral within the seabed in the Caribbean today, or in 2016. And that this wasn't really proving very successful, because when you do monocultural plantations, it depletes the land on which it's growing, because this is what happened many years ago on the island itself, because just after Christopher Columbus first arrived in the Dominican Republic, he set up the Spanish government set up sugar plantations, which were then harvested and grown through forced labor, through slavery. And so not only was that a form of extraction of labor force from another place, another part of the world, it was also an extraction of the minerals and materials of the land, of the land itself, that actually depleted the soils and actually depleted the energy to then not allow for other things to really grow later. So what he was trying to encourage was a rather different way of understanding the possibility for a much more plural and multiple kind of form of ecosystem. So the film that I did takes place there on the lake, and it actually speaks about many other things that I don't really have time to talk about right now. But the thing that I was mostly interested in trying to pick up on today was this idea of the fact of, you know, looking at fossils, looking at the dead, trying to understand perhaps this piece of coral we're looking at now. This again is a huge piece of fossilized coral, to try and understand how we can look back at the dead, or look back with the dead or through the dead, to try and think about our present tense, and to try and think about the political and social and ecological problems that we're facing in the present, and how perhaps through conversing and with the dead and learning from the dead and creating forms of solidarity and partnership perhaps with people who are dead, through this kind of this way of bringing them back to life again, through the forms of archaeology or paleontology or stratigraphy, through these different sciences that try to kind of, you know, give voice to these dead beings. How can we perhaps learn from them today, to try and give us a better indication of, you know, what type of human activity might actually be able to generate and allow life to flourish on a planet that is already, you know, based upon death, based upon the death of some people for the benefit and the life of others. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lue, for this very interesting approach to your second presentation or your presenting of one part at least of your second project. Unfortunately, maybe you can share where or how to look at this second video to the audience, just like an idea about what was the word. Because the first work we are inviting them to see it in Mala Stanica, but the second one, it would be nice if they have some, at least a part of the video to see as an extract from this video, because it really gives an interesting approach to...
Yeah, it can be seen. There's an extract. If you look up my name, Louis Henderson, and on Vimeo, then you can see an extract. But otherwise, if people are interested, they can ask you and I can send a link. You know, people can watch it for free online because it's not being shown. It's being shown in London actually next week at Somerset House, funnily enough, in an exhibition, but it's not going to be in Macedonia. So not now anyway. But yeah, I would be more than happy to share a link, because what I spoke about is a very tiny fragment. The film really talks largely about the fact that, in my opinion anyway, and in many other people's opinions, the climate crisis that we're facing today is in some respects, you know, or was in some respects engendered by, you know, the European colonial project in the Americas, particularly with the arrival of Columbus, and especially with the advent of, or with the creation, the invention of the transatlantic slave trade, and how through slavery, Europe managed to, you know, accrue enormous amounts of capital, to make them one of the most powerful continents on the globe, and then how that engendered and gave power to the, for example, the Industrial Revolution, which has in many respects, you know, created the largest amount of carbon emissions, and, you know, which has caused the sort of ongoing development of industrial capitalism that has led to the climate crisis, you know, that we're facing. So the film speaks really about that. But just today, I wanted to focus on the idea of fossils, because it's something I'm very interested in at the moment.
Yeah, it's really an interesting approach, and it talks about the multi-layered actually point of view to many different stories related to ecologists. So you can approach to this topic from very different perspectives, definitely. And I found this conversation with both of you very inspiring and very linking in some way, on some other parts very different, of course. Maybe I will now ask the audience if they have questions, to ask the questions in the part of questions and answers, or I can as well ask both of you to ask the other artist question if you have some doubts, or you want to comment on some of the points of the other artist. It would be interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess until someone maybe asks a question, I just wanted to say, to ask you, Louis, whether you've heard that the transatlantic slave trade, the route of the transatlantic slave trade, is the same route that the internet cables are kind of laid out in. So they kind of match.
Yeah, this is something that I saw some years ago. You could actually overlay the maps of those. I mean, of course, they follow that in some ways because it's the old trade routes. And which is, you know, interesting to think about in a poetic sense, but also actually just quite structurally, you know, sort of makes sense. And you can overlay those different stories. They're obviously very different and they work in very different ways. But it is intriguing to see that those connections, you know. I mean, and there's some, I think that's interesting to think about, like the relationship between the colonial warehouse and the data center. I mean, again, it's these sites in which, you know, commodities are kind of held and stored. And to think about in our current climate anyway, that, you know, perhaps, or maybe not even just the data center, we could also think about logistics centers as well. And I mean, this still exists. There's still great amount of, you know, actual commodities that are circulating the globe on the backs of ships. We saw that recently when, you know, the whole economic crisis that came when the boat got stuck in the Suez Canal. So it's still very material, very real, as much as it tries to become, you know, something dematerialized.
very fragile at the same time, because you kind of think, well, you know, the supply chain, you know, be it food or energy, you know, it's you just realize how fragile it is. You know, just one ship gets stuck in the canal, and you know, like the whole globe is suffering, and the supply chains just kind of break everywhere.
Exactly.
And the other thing, I guess, like about this, the internet cables and the slave trade, it kind of made me think of modern slavery, and think of, you know, like Amazon, and you know, it's I guess like there is still that sort of exploitation, as you know, very properly, you know, like as you say in your film, you know, that exploitation exists. And I guess that, you know, it kind of feels like we're going back to the time where when, you know, when companies used to be kind of as powerful as countries. So I guess, like, you know, when you think about like the Dutch, and what was the name of like their company, I can't remember now, but, you know, it kind of feels like nowadays, you know, Amazon and Google or Facebook, you know, are just as big, or if not kind of like bigger than states. And there's this like very, very weird power struggle, well, not struggle, but like this you know, power grasping thing that kind of gives place, or lends itself to kind of like a new type of slavery almost.
Yeah. And I think in the face of that, I mean, that's the question I was interested to ask you as well, to see, I mean, unless there's any other questions from the audience, but perhaps No, I mean, just I would be interested also briefly to hear then, I mean, in the face of these kind of things, of course, we can make films and videos and art projects about these kind of topics and these subjects. And I'm interested to see, you know, like these films that I made, this is from, I said, like 8 years, 9 years ago. Even The Sea is History is from like 5 years ago, 6 years ago now even. And since that time, I've changed my practice very much. And the work I do is much more engaged on the ground in Haiti, for example. And this collective I work with, it's become more of a kind of social project that extends far beyond just artistic production. And I was interested to see that with your work, you know, that you're teaming up and working with scientists and people doing actual, I mean, I don't like saying actual work, but you know what I mean, in the sense that art has a position and has an important place as a form of entertainment or education, but it's not exactly, you know, the same as doing work as the paleontologist that I met who's researching. And I wondered how you see yourself and your own practice, your engagement with those scientists and ecological activists, if we could call them that. You know, how do you configure that collaboration between you and between them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it's always a bit of a back and forth, you know, when I mean, for you, you know, yourself, you're a filmmaker, and, you know, collaboration is at the heart of kind of doing anything, because, you know, there's a lot of like conversations that you need to have with people, and you know, how do you divide things? But also it's a way to kind of step away from the ego, because, you know, when you collaborate, you just have to step away and to just be open and to hear the other person. And I think that, you know, just to get the right balance across, because, like, for example, on the Ohrid project, I also worked with activists, kind of like grassroots-based organizations in Ohrid, who are basically on the front lines, and, you know, they're even getting death threats from the industry, because, you know, they're kind of saying, no, you can't build here. And, you know, it's very rewarding. I think it's the thing that I'm really interested in is kind of doing all the things that kind of attach themselves to the project. So like doing workshops with young people, or kind of seeing, you know, so with the activists, with this organization, I work together with them, with Ohrid SOS, to work with young people and to kind of, you know, like go through them, like, you know, to talk about like how we can use new technologies in order to talk about climate change. And, you know, it's really inspiring to see, fantastic, you know, like how young people are responding to things. And I think the main thing for me lately has become, well, I want to make my work as accessible as possible. So I want to kind of create a story that can resonate with as many people as possible. And, you know, this was like the nice thing with Ohrid, for example. It was a public presentation, anyone could join. Or, you know, at Green Man, you know, like festival goers were just watching the eels. And, you know, I thought that was pretty amazing, because, you know, it's a different type of audience, and it's a different type of scale as well. So yeah, I mean, how about you? I mean, of course, you're very active in Haiti, and how, you know, what are the other elements that kind of resonate with you at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, I must say, I don't do it much work really to do with the ecological aspects of things. More in recent years, more social side of cinema, trying to think of cinema as a social space, or not even think of it, just try and work with it and understand cinema as a social space, and what cinema can produce. You know, like, I'm interested in the afterlife of cinema. I mean, again, this question of death, I think I've only spoken about death today. I think it's my big topic. I mean, I know it's my big topic, and I'm interested in, once cinema production finishes, and then what can continue, you know, after the event of film production. And this means trying to create the sort of social fabric around, you know, understanding the importance of actually developing things that are lasting. And that's why we created the Living in the Dead ensemble, as this kind of social platform from which we could provide some opportunities for some very, you know, a very talented group of young people from Haiti, which is a country that has been systemically impoverished over the centuries, because it was the first country to claim independence from slavery, and the first anti-colonial revolution, with the first successful anti-colonial revolution in the globe, really. And you know, so that's something that the person I work with, Olivier Marbeuf, and I have been interested in for some years. And yeah, so we've tried to extend our own film practices into this more socially engaged kind of project, and so far it's going well. You know, we're still working with them, with the group, and you know, so I mean, in a sense, that's a question of ecosystems actually as well. It's a question of ecology. It's a question of ecology, in the sense of what kind of ecology, and, you know, a sort of ethical consideration of the ecology of film production, particularly when talking about questions of colonial history as a European, you know.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's something we're kind of figuring out. It's not, it's not easy.
Yeah, I guess you need to be very mindful on how you approach, of course, like how you approach colonialism, given that, you know, where you're coming from and backgrounds and everything. So yes, I mean, it's a very kind of, I guess it's a very tight rope that you need to, like, it's a thin line you need to thread when approaching these subjects. But I think it's beautiful that more and more, you know, conversations are kind of like arise from around the topic. And you know, like, I don't know if you're aware that for example, the Benin sculptures from Germany, some of them are being returned, you know, to back to their kind of like original locations. That I think that the British Museum is still like not engaging, but I think that pressure will kind of probably, you know, happen. But it's quite beautiful that, you know, like countries, you know, European countries are recognizing the fact that, you know, these objects need to be, you know, repatriated toward, like, you know, it's a step towards reconciliation. So I think, you know, it's a very good momentum for at least kind of recognizing the colonial past. And
as long as it's not just done as an empty symbolic gesture.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you very much for your very fruitful conversation. I am sure that it can continue without end, because there are a lot of other aspects that we can touch and discuss, and it can go on and go on and go on. But unfortunately, we have some shortage in time already.
Yeah.
So at the end, I would thank you very much for accepting the invitation to be a part of
Thank you
this
for
public
inviting us.
engagement program.
Thanks.
And I will invite once again the audience to come and see the exhibition in Mala Stanica if they haven't seen it yet. And I will thank to British Council and Lux and the National Gallery for being partners in this wonderful project, which is followed by the exhibition and by this online talks and meeting different kinds of artists. So I hope that we will have a chance to see in near future, work together, talk together. So I wish you a pleasant evening and until our next meeting. Bye-bye. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. You too.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.